I want to start with a photograph. Not a famous one. Not one you'd find in a textbook. A grainy black and white image, taken in 1959, of a group of men standing on the Antarctic ice, gathered around a drill core they just pulled from a mile beneath their feet. It's an unremarkable picture. Standard scientific documentation from an era when we were only beginning to understand what was under all that ice. Men in heavy parkas, squinting into the wind. And in the center, held up between two of them, a long cylinder of ancient frozen water. I've looked at that photograph more times than I care to admit. And I want to be honest with you from the start, I cannot tell you with certainty what is in it. The image quality is poor. The reproduction is bad. And every claim made about it, including the ones I'm going to walk you through, deserves your skepticism. But it stayed with me. Because of what happened afterward. If you've been following this series, you'll know we've been examining the same pattern again and again. Places closed off. Structures sealed. Records that stop mid-sentence. The forests. The canals. The bricked-up buildings. And every time, the same shape emerges, something is found, and within a remarkably short window, the finding is buried, the site is closed, and the people who were there scatter. This episode is about the coldest, emptiest, most closed-off place on Earth. And the question that sits underneath all of it, why is the least habitable continent on the planet also the most restricted? Let me give you the pattern, and let me be honest about where it's solid and where it isn't. Start with what's verifiable, because it's genuinely strange on its own. Antarctica is the only continent on Earth that no one owns. In 1959, 12 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, at the absolute height of the Cold War, when they could agree on almost nothing, sat down together and signed a treaty. The Antarctic Treaty. And what they agreed on was remarkable. No military activity. No mining. No resource extraction. No nuclear testing. No territorial claims. The entire continent, frozen in place, set aside for science. Now, the official explanation for this is noble, and I want to give it its due. It was, we're told, a triumph of international cooperation. A recognition that this pristine wilderness should be preserved for humanity, not carved up and exploited. And there's real truth to that. Scientists genuinely wanted the ice protected. That's documented. But here's what I kept circling back to. Think about 1959. Think about who these people were. The United States and the Soviet Union were, at that exact moment, racing to point nuclear weapons at each other. They could not agree on Berlin. They could not agree on Korea. They could not agree on anything. And yet, on Antarctica, they agreed instantly. Completely. And permanently. Two superpowers, who trusted each other with nothing, both voluntarily surrendered any claim to an entire continent. A landmass larger than Europe. Sitting on top of an unknown quantity of mineral wealth. And they simply, walked away from it. Together. At the same time. And locked the door behind them. That's the coordination problem. And I don't have an explanation for it that fully satisfies me. Because consider the alternative behavior. If Antarctica had held nothing but ice and rock and penguins, the natural instinct of both nations would have been to claim as much of it as possible, plant flags, and dig. That's what nations do. That's what they had always done, everywhere else on Earth. The entire history of the 20th century is two empires carving up whatever they could reach. Except here. Here, they did the opposite. Here, they agreed, with unusual speed, and unusual unanimity, that no one would dig. No one would mine. No one would go looking. The obvious question is, what makes a continent worth locking rather than looting? And to get anywhere near an answer, we have to look at what happened in the years immediately before that treaty was signed. The late 1940s and 1950s were the most intense period of Antarctic exploration in human history. And the operation that towers over all of them is Operation Highjump. This is documented. This is real. In 1946, the United States Navy sent an expedition to Antarctica under Admiral Richard Byrd. And the scale of it was extraordinary. Nearly 5,000 men. 13 ships. Multiple aircraft. An aircraft carrier. Read that again. An aircraft carrier. Sent to the ice. The official purpose was training. Testing equipment and personnel in extreme cold, in preparation for possible conflict in the Arctic against the Soviets. And that explanation is reasonable. It's the one in the history books. I want to be honest that it is probably, in large part, true. But it's worth pausing on the sheer scale. 5,000 men is not a survey team. That is an invasion force, in everything but name, dispatched to the emptiest place on Earth to fight, apparently, no one. And then it ended early. Operation Highjump was planned to last 8 months. It was cut short and withdrawn in less than 2. The official explanation is that conditions were worse than expected. The ice was severe. Equipment failed. Men were lost. And again, that is reasonable. Antarctica is genuinely brutal. I accept that. But it's the pattern I keep returning to. Something enormous is mobilized. It goes somewhere remote. It comes back early. And afterward, the place it went is closed. Because here is what followed. Highjump ends in 1947. And within 12 years, that continent has been locked away by international treaty, forever, by every nation capable of reaching it. Now, this is the part where I have to be careful. Because this is where I leave the firm ground of the archive and step onto something much softer. There are accounts, and I want to be clear that these are not verifiable, that they come to us secondhand, through interviews and unreliable transcriptions, and that serious historians dismiss them entirely, accounts attributed to Admiral Byrd himself. Statements he supposedly made after returning. Warnings about what lay beyond the pole. About land that shouldn't be there. About something that could cross from pole to pole with tremendous speed. I am not presenting that to you as fact. I want to say that plainly. Much of it is fringe. Some of it is almost certainly fabricated. The most famous, Byrd Diary, is, by any reasonable standard, a hoax. But here's the thing I've learned doing this work. You do not need the fringe accounts. You never do. The fringe is the noise, and the noise is what discredits the whole conversation. Set it aside entirely. Throw out every unverified diary, every second-hand quote, every dubious transcript. And what you are left with is still this: 2 hostile superpowers, at the height of their mutual hatred, agreed within a decade of a massive naval operation to permanently seal an entire continent and forbid anyone from digging into it. That fact alone requires no conspiracy theory. It sits right there in the historical record. And it has never been adequately explained. So what's under the ice? And this is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because we know. We have known, in outline, for decades. And what we know is stranger than most people realize. Antarctica was not always frozen. Antarctica was not always frozen. This is not speculation. This is mainstream, established, uncontroversial science. Fossils have been recovered from Antarctic rock, fossils of trees. Of ferns. Of dinosaurs. Of temperate forests. There was a time, and geologists will tell you this without hesitation, when Antarctica was green. When it had rivers. Forests, living things moving through the warm air of a continent that is now the deadest place on Earth. The official timeline places that world tens of millions of years ago, long before anything resembling a human being existed. And I want to be honest, that is the scientific consensus, and I am not qualified to overturn it. But sit with the fact itself for a moment, because it is extraordinary, and we skate past it too easily. Beneath 2 miles of ice, there is a landscape. A real one. With mountains and valleys and, this is documented, mapped by radar, lakes. Hundreds of them. Liquid water lakes, sealed beneath the ice, some of them the size of inland seas. Lake Vostok alone is comparable in size to Lake Ontario, buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice, cut off from the surface of the Earth for an unimaginable length of time. We have mapped this hidden landscape. We know it's there. And we have barely touched it. And here we run into something that, once you notice it, is very difficult to unnotice. There is enormous institutional resistance to drilling into those lakes. Now, the stated reason is contamination. And it is a good reason. It is, I think, largely the true reason. If Lake Vostok has been sealed for millions of years, anything living in it is a scientific treasure beyond price, and a single drill bit carrying surface bacteria could destroy it forever. Scientists are right to be cautious. I want to give that its full weight. But notice the shape of the argument. It is, once again, an argument for not looking. A tidy, reasonable, well-supported argument for leaving a sealed place sealed. And it lands on top of a treaty that already forbids digging. On a continent that a naval armada visited and then abruptly left. Which 12 nations then agreed, unanimously, to close. Layer upon layer upon layer, each one justified locally, each one perfectly defensible on its own terms, and the cumulative effect of all of them is the same. Nobody digs. Nobody looks. The ice stays closed. That's what I mean by the coordination problem. It is not that any single decision is sinister. It's that every single decision, made by different people for different reasons across different decades, points in exactly the same direction. Now let me return to the photograph. The ice core, and the men standing around it in 1959. I told you at the start that I can't tell you what's in that image, and I meant it. The claims made about it online are extravagant and I don't believe most of them. People see shapes in the ice. People always see shapes in the ice. That is what human beings do. But here is what interests me, and it isn't the shape. Ice cores are among the most precious objects in science. They are, quite literally, frozen time. Every layer is a year. Every bubble of trapped air is a sample of an ancient atmosphere. They are catalogued, archived, stored in freezers at enormous expense, and preserved for generations of study. And the archival record for the cores pulled in that specific period, the years immediately surrounding the treaty, is a mess. Cores logged and then unaccounted for. Documentation that ends abruptly. Samples transferred to institutions that have no record of receiving them. That is not evidence of giants under the ice. I want to be extremely clear about that. It is far more likely evidence of poor 1950s record-keeping in the most hostile environment on the planet, where men were losing fingers and aircraft were crashing and nobody's filing system was a priority. That's the honest answer. That's probably what happened. But it's the same shape again, isn't it? The same shape we found in the mine records in Kentucky. In the demolition orders that were never carried out. In the canal that was abandoned when the water drained away into hollow ground. A gap in the paperwork, right where the interesting thing should be. One gap is an accident. Two is a coincidence. I've lost count of how many we're at now. So let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there are giants under the Antarctic ice. I have no evidence for that, and neither does anyone else. The photographs are grainy. The diaries are fake. The eyewitness accounts fall apart the moment you examine them. What I'm saying is narrower, and I think harder to dismiss. I'm saying that Antarctica is the only continent that human beings have collectively, formally, and permanently agreed not to dig into. That this agreement was reached with impossible speed by nations who agreed on nothing else. That it followed hard on the heels of one of the largest naval deployments ever sent anywhere, which returned early and told us almost nothing. And that beneath the ice lies a mapped, real, hidden landscape, with mountains and valleys and lakes, that we have chosen, again and again, for reasons that are always excellent, not to open. And that brings me to the question that actually keeps me up. Not what's under the ice. I don't know what's under the ice. Nobody does. That's the whole point. The one is simpler. If you wanted to hide something, not for a decade, but forever, what would you actually do? You wouldn't destroy it. Destruction leaves debris, and debris raises questions. You wouldn't guard it, because guards attract attention, and attention is the one thing you cannot afford. You would bury it somewhere no one can survive. You would get everyone to agree, formally and internationally, that no one is permitted to dig there. You would provide excellent scientific reasons for that agreement, reasons so good that the scientists themselves would defend the seal, sincerely, forever. And then you would simply wait. Because ice is patient. And a place that everyone agrees is empty is a place nobody ever checks. Here is what we know for certain. Antarctica was once green, warm, and alive. That is documented. Beneath its ice lies a full hidden landscape of mountains, valleys, and hundreds of sealed liquid lakes. That is mapped. In 1946 the United States sent an armada of 5,000 men and an aircraft carrier there, and withdrew early. That is on record. And in 1959, 12 years later, the enemies of the Cold War agreed, unanimously and permanently, that no one would ever mine, dig, or claim it. Each of these facts alone is a curiosity. Together, they are the outline of something. The men in that photograph are all dead now. Whatever they pulled out of the ice that day, they took with them. But the ice is still there. And the landscape underneath it is still there. Mapped, known, and untouched, the last sealed room on Earth, in the one place we have all agreed never to open. If you want to know what the ice cores that did survive actually show, and why the layers stop where they shouldn't, the next chapter is waiting for you. But first, one question. If there is a whole world beneath the ice, and every nation on Earth has agreed never to look, would you want them to break the seal? Or is that one continent better left frozen? Tell me below. I read every one.